Hi everyone, today let's learn about the desert. Not dessert. Notice it only has one S. The desert is the land of little water, so this is the driest biome on Earth. The word desert comes from a root meaning to abandon, or the abandoned place. So a desert is abandoned or empty because it's very difficult to live there. It's very harsh conditions and it's extremely hard to survive in the desert. Not only because there's not very much water, but also because the temperatures are extreme. They can get very hot and also very, very cold. So animals and plants, living things that can survive in the desert, have to be well adapted. So here are some common traits of the desert. All deserts are very dry. So whether a desert is hot or cold, it's receiving very little rainfall, so less than 10 inches of rain per year. Some deserts might get, 12 or 13 inches, but generally, most scientists will say deserts will get less than 10. It's an approximate number. But that's not very much rainfall a year. Remember, in Colorado, we can get up to 10 inches of rain or 10 inches of precipitation in one day, in one storm. So that's not very much at all. Deserts also have extreme temperatures. They can vary from extremely hot to extremely cold. There's very little water, which makes it hard to survive for animals and plants alike, because all living things need water to survive. And because of all of these things, because it's dry and there's extreme temperatures, there's also very few people who live there. Some towns and cities do make their home in the desert, but not nearly as many living things as other biomes, like forests, for example. So anything that lives in the desert has to be well adapted. Let's talk first about a desert climate. So there are two types of desert: hot deserts and cold deserts. Usually when we think of desert, we're thinking hot desert, right? The sun beating down on you, sand in your face, deserts like the Sahara Desert in Africa, and deserts in the United States are such as, Death Valley in California. These are hot deserts, which means, most of the time their temperatures are going to reach above 100 or up in the 90s. But you also have deserts on Earth which are cold deserts. So places like the Gobi Desert in China, that's the biggest cold desert on Earth. And it's still a desert because it gets less than 10 inches of rainfall a year, and it's very, very dry and hard to live there. But it's not a hot desert, so it might not get up to the hundreds and the 90s like we usually think of with deserts. But all deserts, whether they're hot or cold, are dry. That's what makes a desert a desert. It's dry, and there's not very much water. So less than 10 inches of rain per year. This symbol right here means less than. Less than 10 inches of rain per year. Also, deserts are colder at night. So again, whether it's a hot desert or a cold desert, one of the things that makes deserts unique is that they can drop to extreme temperatures once the sun goes down. And that's because there's not very much moisture. So we've learned over the past few weeks that water is a great regulator. The oceans that are all around our Earth are part of the reason that the temperature on Earth can stay so constant. It's because the water is trapping and absorbing all of this heat. Without water in the environment, heat doesn't get absorbed quite as much, and so it comes and it goes. So in the desert, it might get really hot during the day, up to the 90s or 100s, but then once the sun goes down, all of that heat disappears. It doesn't stay trapped in the environment or trapped in the atmosphere because there's not enough water to hold on to it. So like even though it's so hot during the day, it can drop to really, really cold temperatures at night, sometimes down in the 30s even, Fahrenheit. So pause your video. We're on question number 1 in our Google form, or if you are just writing it down, feel free to take notes on a piece of paper and you can go back and fill in the Google form after the video. Question number 1 is describe the climate in the desert. Describe the climate in the desert. So you could have told me that the desert gets less than 10 inches of rainfall per year, that it's a very dry place, and that it has extreme temperatures from hot all the way to cold. All right, let's talk about the animals in the desert. Like I said, wildlife in the desert has to be well adapted to be able to survive here. So desert animals are well adapted to deal with harsh conditions, and that means they can either carry water. So for example, think of the camel who stores, well, it's not really water, but they have a store of fat in their hump, which they can then turn into water for themselves and energy for themselves. So they either carry water or they just limit their need for water. So they can go several days or several weeks without drinking water. Some animals have big ears to catch the breeze and to cool their bodies off. Other animals adapt to the harsh conditions of the desert by hiding. So they hide either in the shade or they'll hide underground, or some of them are nocturnal. So they'll sleep during the day and then come out at night when it's much cooler. So we have all sorts of different creatures in the desert. Not nearly the same amount of variety of wildlife as we see in a temperate forest or a tropical rainforest, but still a lot of creatures have evolved and adapted to make their home here. So the camel, as you can see, not only has that big hump, but also these long eyelashes to help keep dirt out of their eyes and sand. We have jackrabbits, who spend a lot of their time sleeping during the day, but they also have these big ears which catch the breeze and allow their bodies to cool off. You can kind of see inside of their ears, they have all those veins, and so their blood, as it's pumping through their ears, is getting cooled off by the breeze. And then you have lots of reptiles who can make their home in the desert. Remember, reptiles are well adapted to the desert, partially because they're cold-blooded, so they need sunlight and heat in order to have energy to live their life. So this desert tortoise is happy and at home in the desert. Same with these fennec foxes. Notice their big ears, just like the jackrabbit. So their ears are a tool to catch the breeze and help cool them down. Also notice that their fur is the same color or a similar color to the sand and the rocks around them, so that allows them good camouflage for hunting. And of course you have rattlesnakes. Sorry to my students, I know we have a couple students who are severely afraid of snakes. Just look away, look away. But rattlesnakes and other types of snakes make their home in the desert. Again, reptiles are well adapted to be able to deal with the lack of water and the heat in the desert. So lots of reptiles, lizards, snakes, turtles make their home in the desert. All right, pause your video and answer question number 2 for me, please. List 3 ways that animals have adapted to the harsh conditions of the desert. How do they survive? Okay, awesome. Now let's talk about the plants of the desert. So desert plant, even though it's a dry place, there are still plants that make their home in the desert. Just like animals, they're well adapted. So that means they have developed over time different parts and pieces of their body, different plant parts that allow them to survive. So some plants are able to store water inside of themselves, like cacti. Some desert plants have sharp spikes. This serves two purposes. One, the sharp spikes help gather water from the atmosphere. Think of like little dewdrops gathering on the tips of these spikes in the morning, and the spikes help to funnel that water towards the plant. But it also protects the plant from being eaten. So in a place that's very hard to survive, you kind of have to be tough to be able to continue your life cycle. So lots of plants in the desert are kind of scary and sharp and spiky because they're trying to survive in a harsh place. So they don't want to be eaten before they have their chance to grow and reproduce. Also, a lot of desert plants have thick skin. Again, two purposes for thick skin. One, to protect it from being eaten, but two, to prevent it from releasing too much moisture. So their thick, waxy skin kind of traps all the water inside. And then a lot of desert plants have deep, deep roots. They're able to dig through the sand and the clay and get down into that deep groundwater. And desert plants are adapted to soak up lots of sun. So some plants are better for the shade, some plants are better for the sun, but typically plants that do well in the desert can take a full day of sun. So you have cacti or a cactus, and if you have multiple cacti together, we call it cacti. One cactus, two or more cacti. And there's so many different species and types of cacti in the world. And then you have plants like agave. Notice these little spikes. Notice their thick, waxy skin. Notice how they look kind of bubbly and juicy inside these leaves. And that's because they're holding onto the water inside. Here's another type of agave plant. Sharp, spiky. Right? Prevents animals from eating it and also helps funnel the water down into the plant. And it serves animals too, because a lot of smaller mammals and little birds can make their homes inside of these spiky plants, and it protects them. It's almost like having, an armored castle or something. It keeps them safe from bigger birds and bigger predators. So plants are doing double duty, as always, serving as food and shelter for other animals. All right, pause your video. Let's answer the third and final question on your Google form. Number 3, list one way that plants have adapted to the harsh conditions of the desert. One adaptation. Okay, so hopefully you've learned something interesting about the desert today. Just like I've said with all of the biomes, it's so hard to go into detail about all the things on each biome in one lesson or one day, because there are so many different plants and animals and species that live there. And we could talk about all the different deserts on Earth. So we could spend a whole year studying the desert and still wouldn't understand all of it. But now at least you understand what makes a desert a desert. All deserts are dry and hard places to live with not very much water and very extreme temperatures. But they're still beautiful, beautiful places. And plants and animals and living things, even people, have adapted and found ways to survive there and make their home there. So these are magnificent, sometimes scary, intimidating, and beautiful places on Earth. So, have you ever been to the desert? Do you love the desert? I love it out there. I think it is so beautiful. But if you're going to go into the desert, make sure you are prepared, because it is not an easy place to find food and water. Alrighty, my friends, that'll do it for today. You are ready to take your DOL. Please make sure that you've finished filling out your Google form, and I will talk to you later.